My 7-year-old grandson, EMTT, ran up in a fright and whispered to me just as I was getting ready to leave for the office, "Grandma, don't get in the car. It's really dangerous." I was surprised and asked him why. He whispered, "They said your car is going to explode because my mom gave the order." I tried to stay calm when suddenly my daughter-in-law, Marissa, appeared. "I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of betrayal from. I want to know how far it's reached." I went down the stairs. The wooden steps creaked softly under my familiar heels. The aroma of Marissa's freshly brewed coffee filled the dining room, blending with the morning light streaming through the window. Robert, my son, was sitting at the table, eyes glued to his tablet, scanning news headlines. He looked up and gave me that warm smile that always melted my heart. "Hey." "Mom, why are you up so early today?" he said in his familiar deep voice. I smiled back. In the corner of the room, EMTT, my grandson, was sitting on the floor carefully building a Lego tower. The boy is barely 7 years old, but sometimes I feel he's more mature than he seems. Today he was strangely quiet without his typical chatter. He was just focused on the colorful bricks. I figured he was probably absorbed in his game. I quickly drank the glass of orange juice on the table. The usual sweet and tart flavor cleared my head a little. My brown leather handbag was already on the chair. I picked it up and checked that I hadn't forgotten anything. I walked over to kiss Robert's forehead like I did every morning. Then I stroked MT's soft hair, which made me smile. "Grandma's off to work. Have a great day at school," I said softly. EMTT looked up. His big eyes watched me without answering. He just nodded slightly. Reaching the door, I took my car keys and pressed the unlock button. The black Cadillac in the garage flashed as if waiting for me. I took a deep breath, preparing for a long day. But just then, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. EMTT, with his little legs, ran toward me and clung tightly to the edge of my jacket. I jumped and nearly dropped my keys. His face was pale, his eyes wide open, filled with a fear I had never seen in a child. He glanced quickly toward the dining room where Marissa was still tidying up, and then leaned in close to my ear, his voice trembling, barely a whisper. "Grandma, don't get in the car. It's really dangerous." I felt my heart stop for a second. I knelt down to his eye level, trying to stay calm, though everything inside me was shaking. "What is it, honey? What's going on, EMTT?" I asked gently, holding his shoulders. The boy looked around again, as if afraid someone might hear him. Then he moved closer and his voice was so low I had to strain to listen. They said, "Grandma's car is going to explode because Mom ordered it." Emmett's words cut through me like a knife. My blood ran cold. Marissa, my daughter-in-law, the woman I always thought of as a daughter, the one who'd been with my family for so many years. I tried to keep my face serene. I stroked the boy's hair, but my mind was reeling. How could a 7-year-old say something like that? Was it just his imagination, or was something truly happening? At that moment, Marissa came out of the dining room with my laptop bag in her hand. She smiled, a radiant, perfect smile as always. "Mom, you forgot this. I already charged the battery. Drive safe," she said sweetly as if nothing was wrong. But I couldn't help noticing something in her eyes, something indefinable. Robert also came out of the dining room and added from behind, "Yeah, Mom, this new project is a lot of work these days. Take care of yourself." His voice sounded as loving as ever, but today it seemed distant, as if I were outside my own family, looking at a picture that wasn't the same anymore. I forced a smile and took the bag from Marissa's hands. "Thanks, honey," I said, trying to sound as natural as possible. "But I have a bit of a headache today. I think I'll take a taxi to work to be more relaxed." I had barely finished speaking when I noticed Marissa raising an eyebrow slightly. It was only an instant, but enough for me to see it. "Why, Mom? If you want, I can drive you," she offered in her usual sweet tone, though I sensed a slight discomfort. "No need. I'd rather go alone," I quickly replied, waving my hand. Marissa nodded, still smiling. but I saw that flicker of disappointment in her eyes that disappeared instantly. It was so fleeting that anyone could have missed it. But now, after MT's warning, every one of her gestures seemed suspicious. I turned to EMTT and took his small, cold hand. "I'll take EMTT to school on the way." "We can spend some time together," I said, trying to sound cheerful, though inside everything was a whirlwind. I didn't wait for Marissa's reaction. I simply took the boy's hand and headed straight for the door. EMTT squeezed my hand tightly as if afraid I would vanish. I felt a slight tremor in his fingers, and that broke my heart. The doorman hurried to open the heavy iron gate when he saw me leave. He bowed to greet me, but avoided looking me in the eye. That small detail made me even more nervous. We had worked for my family for 2 years, ever since Marissa had recommended him. She said he was honest and hardworking, but now I wondered if I had trusted her words too much. I took out my phone and opened the app to call a rideshare. The screen indicated it would arrive in 3 minutes. As I waited, I hugged EMTT tightly, feeling my heart pound hard against my chest. The boy nestled against me without saying anything, but his eyes reflected pure fear. I stroked his hair, trying to calm him. "It's okay, sweetie. I'm here with you." Though I was really trying to calm myself down. A white Toyota taxi pulled up in front of the house. I opened the back door, helped EMTT climb in, and then got in myself. I kept his hand in mine, as if letting go would mean losing my last support. I gave the driver the school address, my voice a little shaky but trying to remain composed. Then I mentioned the address of my office, though I had already decided not to go. When the car began to move, pulling away from the residential area with its tree-lined streets, I let out a sigh of relief, but that feeling was as fragile as glass about to shatter. I looked at EMTT. He was hunched in his seat, his hands clasped together. His eyes still showed fear, but also a spark of trust when he looked at me. I smiled at him, trying to ease the tension. "EMTT," I said in a low voice, almost a whisper. "Can you tell me exactly what you heard? Tell me everything in detail. I want to understand what happened completely." The boy nodded, but I noticed him pressing his lips together, as if struggling to gather enough courage. After a moment, he took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice still trembling. "This morning, I woke up early when everyone was still sleeping. I went out to the yard to play with my toy robots in the corner near the rose bush where Mr. Wei usually stands guard." He paused and looked at me as if to make sure I was listening. I nodded to encourage him without letting go of his hand. "I built a kind of secret base behind the rose bushes." Emmett continued quieter now. "And then I heard Mr. Wei talking on the phone. He was speaking Chinese very softly, like he didn't want anyone to hear him. I was curious, so I crept closer." His eyes widened as if reliving the moment. I heard a few sentences, not very clear, but I heard him say, "The lady is about to leave. Then she just has to get in the car and it's going to explode." I also heard him mention Mom. He said everything was according to her orders. Emmett's words pierced my heart like needles. I felt my breathing grow heavy, but I tried to keep my face serene so as not to scare him further. "Are you sure you didn't misunderstand?" I asked softly but firmly. I needed to be sure. Needed to know it wasn't a child's fantasy. EMTT nodded forcefully with a determination uncommon for a 7-year-old. "I wasn't wrong," he said with a confident voice. "Grandpa taught me those words. The lady is Obanyang and to explode is Ba." Mr. Wei said exactly that. I remember it very well. Hearing him, a chill ran down my spine. Memories of Nest, my husband, flooded back like a wave. The afternoons he sat on the porch, patiently teaching EMTT words in Chinese with that warm, loving voice. He used to say it was the language of the future, but I knew he just wanted to spend more time with his grandson. Those memories were now like a blade, sweet and painful at once. I looked at EMTT, trying to contain the panic growing inside me. The guard whom Marissa had recommended 2 years ago, had always been described by her as honest and hardworking. I believed her. I believed in the sincerity of her gaze when she spoke of him. But now I wondered if it had all been an act. Marissa, the young woman I had considered a daughter, with whom I had built the big plans for Alvarez Lumber. Could she be capable of plotting something so atrocious? The taxi moved through the familiar streets of San Antonio as the sunlight filtered through the window, forming dancing glints, but I no longer had the presence of mind to look at the scenery. My mind was spinning with hundreds of questions. Why? What reason would Marissa have to do something like this? Money, power, or some resentment I never saw. And EMTT. Why did my little grandson have to witness something so terrible? The car stopped in front of the elementary school. I paid the driver, asking him to wait a moment. I took EMTT's hand and helped him out. Then I hugged him tight. His little body trembled in my arms, and I felt my heart clench. EMTT, I whispered. Your grandma's hero. Listen closely. You can't tell anyone what happened today. Not even your dad understand. Let me handle it. I said those words, but inside I knew I was on the edge of an abyss. How could I protect my grandson? Protect my family when it was the closest people who were setting the trap? Emmett nodded repeatedly, his eyes shining with absolute trust. I watched him walk into the schoolyard, his small figure disappearing among the laughing and chatting students. But for me, that image no longer held the innocence it once did. The boy carried a weight too heavy, and that tore me apart inside. I got back into the taxi and slammed the door shut, feeling I had just closed a door on a false sense of security. Driver, please, I said, my voice suddenly cold. Turn around. Let's go back to the previous address. We're not going to the lumber company. The driver nodded without a word, and the car began to turn. The taxi drove smoothly through the familiar San Antonio streets, the constant sound of the engine like a quiet background melody. I remained still, looking out the window as the morning light filtered through the trees, creating reflections that danced on the glass. But my soul found no peace. Every corner, every row of trees awakened memories, fragments of a past I once thought was perfect. Now they were only sharp shards cutting my heart every time I tried to touch them. The car passed in front of the Bracken Ridge Park, where Nest, my husband, and I used to walk hand in hand every weekend. I still clearly remember the image of him sitting on a bench, his old notebook open on his lap, a pencil tracing the first sketches of Alvarez Lumber. He always dreamed big, his eyes shining as he talked about a lumber company that would conquer the world. Teresa, do you see? Wood isn't just material, it's the soul of every home, he used to say, his voice full of passion. I then, a young newlywed, let myself be swept away by that flame. I learned to turn his dreams into reality, step by step, from that small workshop until Alvarez Lumber became a recognized name. But now, sitting in the taxi, I wondered if those dreams were worth the price of my own safety. When the car turned onto the main avenue, the university building where Robert graduated appeared in the distance. I recalled the day he received his degree, the radiant smile on his face as he held his business administration diploma. So, now I'm almost your apprentice, Mom, he said excitedly, his eyes full of pride. I laughed, patted him on the shoulder, convinced that my son would continue the path Ernest and I had started. Robert, with his quiet nature and artistic touch, always brought me peace. He wasn't like me. He lacked my determination or burning ambition, but I loved his sincerity. I always thought that as long as he was happy, I would be satisfied. Then the memories took me back to the day I met Marissa at a furniture export seminar in Dallas. She was young, barely in her 20s, but her intelligence and sharpness impressed me. She approached me, her eyes bright when she mentioned Alvarez Lumber. Mrs. Alvarez, your company is an inspiration to our generation, she told me, her voice full of sincerity. I was captivated by her confidence, that fire of ambition that I recognized as my own youth. I invited her to dinner and then introduced her to Robert. Seeing them talk and laugh, I believed Marissa would be the perfect piece for my son. A determined and strong woman, capable of balancing his sweetness. How wrong I was to think she would be a part of our family. A daughter-in-law I could love like my own child. The most vivid memory, the one that still squeezes my heart, is the day EMTT was born. I was outside the delivery room, more nervous than Robert, My hands clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. When the nurse brought the baby out, so small, so red, I was the first to hold him. His tiny hand grasped my finger with such force that I felt the whole world stop. At that moment, I thought I had nothing left to regret. EMTT was the light, the greatest joy of my life, especially after Ernest's passing. Every time I watched him grow, I recognized in him his father's image, the curiosity, the intelligence, and that sensitivity few noticed. The taxi slowed down and stopped in front of the familiar iron gate of the mansion. Bougainvillea covered the wall with red flowers trembling in the wind. That house in which I had put so much effort had been my pride, but now it seemed like a luxuriously decorated trap hiding terrifying secrets. I paid the driver, took a deep breath, and tried to calm myself. However, when I opened the door to get out, I felt my legs weigh like lead. The image of a perfect family I had built in my mind for so many years had shattered, and the sharp fragments were scattered everywhere. I stood motionless by the sidewalk, waiting, staring at the iron gate until Robert and Marissa's car disappeared toward the office. Only when I was sure they were far away did I dare to move. I couldn't risk entering through the main gate where Wee was standing guard, with that shifty look I couldn't forget from the morning. He, in whom I once trusted, was now an unknown, one more piece of the hell I was trying to understand. I followed the side path of the house, walking slowly next to the fence covered in dense hibiscus. The green branches swayed gently as if trying to hide me from the outside world. I knew that yard well, every corner, every stone. In the back, there was an old, almost unnoticeable wooden side door that led directly to the back garden. I had always kept the key under a decorative stone hidden behind some bushes. I knelt down, my hands trembling, lifted the stone and felt the cold of the metal as I touched the key. As I inserted it, the screech of the hinges made my heart jump. I held my breath, listening, fearing that the slightest sound would reveal my presence, but the garden remained silent. I could only hear the chirping of birds in the distance. I slipped through the door and closed it carefully, as if entering another world. I crossed the garden, hiding behind the large trees, moving cautiously toward the garage. Every step was a battle between fear and the determination to discover the truth. My black Cadillac remained still in the corner, but it was no longer the car that took me to work every day, but an invisible threat. Emmett's words echoed in my head. Grandma's car is going to explode. I wondered how a 7-year-old boy could carry something so heavy and how I, with over 60 years of life, had reached this point, doubting the people I loved the most. Just then, the phone in my pocket vibrated, a small sound but enough to make me jump. The name Marissa appeared on the screen. My heart began to beat fast, as if wanting to escape my chest. I took a deep breath trying to calm myself and answered, keeping my voice steady, though inside I was a wreck. "I'm listening, honey." Marissa's voice on the other end was still sweet as always, but today it gave me the chills. "Mom, did you get to the office yet? I didn't see your car in the parking lot." Her words sounded kind, but I could feel a hidden agenda behind them. She was checking up on me. I had no doubt about that. Quickly, I responded with the most natural tone possible. "Oh, I remembered I had an unexpected meeting with a lumber supplier out in San Juan del Rio. I took a taxi straight there. I'll probably be back at the office around noon or in the afternoon." I stopped, waiting for her reaction, silently, praying that my voice wouldn't reveal the trembling I felt. There were a few seconds of silence on the other end of the line, a brief but tense void that felt eternal. Then Marissa said, "Oh, I see. You should have let me know so I could reschedule the morning meeting." Her voice was still soft, but I noticed a certain rigidity, as if she was trying to hide something. I smiled, though I knew she couldn't see me. "My apologies. It was all very sudden." "You handle the pending matters," I replied and hung up immediately. When the phone screen went dark, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Marissa was suspicious. I was sure of it, but I didn't have time to let fear dominate me. I had to act. I went straight to the garden tool shed, where I knew Joseph, the gardener who had been with my family for over 20 years, would be working. Joseph was a reliable man, always quiet and dedicated. I saw him carefully cleaning a pair of pruning shears, his gaze as concentrated as if it were the most important job in the world. When he saw me, he jumped, his eyes wide with surprise. "Ma'am, what are you doing here? I thought you had already left for work." I motioned for him to be quiet and led him to a corner behind the shed where the bushes blocked the view from the main house. "Joseph," I said in a grave voice, "I need your help with something. It's a confidential and very dangerous matter. No one must know, not even Wei." I looked him straight in the eyes, trying to convey the urgency in every word. Joseph frowned, the confusion evident on his weathered face, but he nodded without asking anything. I guided him to the garage and pointed at the Cadillac. "Go near that car and see if you notice anything strange. But listen closely, only look, don't touch anything." I emphasized every word, praying inside that EMTT's warning was just a misunderstanding. Joseph knelt down, squinting to look under the car. He stayed there for a long time in such absolute silence that I could hear my own heart. When he straightened up, his face was pale and his hands were shaking. "Ma'am," he stammered, "there's a black box stuck to the chassis. Red and blue wires are coming out of it. They go toward the front, I think, to the battery. It doesn't look like part of the car." Joseph's words hit me like a hammer blow. Emmett's warning was true. I felt my legs weaken, but I pressed my lips together and forced myself to stay firm. "Could you bend down again and take a few clear photos?" I asked, handing him my phone, although my hands were trembling just as much as his. Joseph took the phone, bent down again, and carefully photographed the details. When he handed it back, I turned on the screen and observed every detail. A black box, several tangled wires, something that didn't belong on that car. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "Thank you, Joseph. Now go back to work as if nothing happened. Pretend you saw nothing. Your safety is the most important thing." Joseph nodded, his gaze still confused, but without a word he returned to the shed. I stayed there for a moment, taking deep breaths to calm myself. Then I left the garden through the side door and called another taxi. Sitting in the back seat, my hands were still shaking, and I gripped the phone tightly as if it were the only thing keeping me conscious. I opened my contacts and looked for a name I hadn't spoken to in years. Michael Torres. He was a private investigator, a college friend of Nest's, and the only person I trusted now. I dialed the number, my heart pounding in my chest. When the other side answered, I heard Michael's deep, warm voice. "Teresa, it's been a long time." I didn't beat around the bush and spoke immediately, urgently. "Michael, it's Teresa Alvarez. I need to see you right now." I heard him fall silent for a moment, as if sensing the seriousness in my voice. "All right, Teresa, where should we meet?" he asked. I took a deep breath, aware that from that moment on, everything would change forever. That afternoon, I walked into a small diner hidden in an old alley downtown San Antonio. The yellowish light of the hanging bulbs gave the place a worn air. The smell of roasted coffee mixed with the murmur of a few scattered customers, creating a perfect curtain for our meeting. I chose a table in the farthest corner, where no one I knew could accidentally see me. My chest felt heavy, as if carrying an invisible stone. Michael Torres arrived a few minutes later with a calm walk, but the sharp gaze of someone who has learned to move in the shadows. His salt and pepper hair and cutting eyes were the same as the last time I saw him over a decade ago at a gathering of Nest's friends. He ordered a black coffee and sat down across from me, observing me attentively, as if trying to decipher what I was hiding. Without the need for pleasantries, I placed the phone on the table and opened the photos Joseph had taken under the car. The tangled red and blue wires and that black box appeared on the screen, coldly confirming my worst fears. Michael squinted, took the phone, and zoomed in on every detail. He murmured in a low voice almost to himself, "This is no toy. It looks like a homemade explosive device connected to the vehicle's electrical system." His words cut short my minimal hope that it was all a misunderstanding. I inhaled deeply, containing the panic that threatened to overflow, and began to tell him everything from EMTT's trembling warning, Marissa's suspicious call to what Joseph had discovered under the car. I didn't forget to mention the name Chen Hao that EMTT had heard from Wei. Every word that came out of my mouth was like opening a wound I didn't want to touch again. Michael listened without interrupting me. His eyes never left mine. When I finished speaking, he remained silent for a moment, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the old wooden table. His silence made me even more nervous, but then he spoke in a grave and firm voice. "Teresa, you did very well not to act impulsively. The first thing we need to do is keep an eye on Wei. He's the weakest link in all of this." He paused and looked at me fixedly. "But you must continue with your normal routine, go to work by taxi and not show any suspicion. If they find out you're distrustful, everything will become complicated." I nodded, although inside I just wanted to scream, to run and confront Marissa immediately, but I knew Michael was right. I had to restrain myself, keep playing the role of a mother, a grandmother who knows nothing. "I understand," I said in a low but firm voice. Michael nodded and added, "I'll have my people follow Wei 24 hours a day. Stay calm. I'll find the truth." 3 days passed like an endless nightmare. Every morning I left the house in a taxi, forcing a smile as I greeted Robert and Marissa. Every night I returned, had dinner with the family, and listened to Marissa ask about my work with that sweet and fake voice. Every time I looked her in the eyes, I felt I was facing a stranger, but I kept silent, just as Michael had instructed, though my heart ached with every beat of the betrayal. On the third day, my phone vibrated while I was pretending to review a report at the office. Michael's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. My heart was pounding. "Teresa, I have news," he said, his voice grave but firm. "Meet me at the diner by the highway near the industrial park off Lopez Mateos." At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I didn't ask anything else. I just replied, "I'll be there." When I pushed open the diner door, the smell of fried oil and the sound of frying pans made the atmosphere more suffocating. Michael was already seated at a corner table facing an open laptop. He motioned for me to sit down without a word. "We have results," he said quietly. "That Wei is careful, but not careful enough." He turned the screen toward me. A blurry video appeared, probably recorded by a nearby security camera. In it, we, dressed in civilian clothes, was entering a dark alley near the El Mardo night market. He met another man, Asian, thin, with a nervous look and a cap covering half his face. We handed him a thick brown paper bag and they exchanged a few words before the other man nodded and quickly disappeared into the shadows. Michael pointed at the unknown man. "This is Chen Hao," he said. "My people spoke to the vendors at the night market. They say he's an undocumented immigrant with no fixed job, known for his gambling debts." He opened a thin folder with clear photos of Chen Hao's face and some personal data his team had gathered. I looked at the photo, his thin face and tired eyes, and a chill ran down my spine. Everything matched exactly what EMTT had told me. Michael continued, his voice lower, as if trying to contain his own emotions. "Teresa, this is no longer a suspicion. It's a planned assassination attempt, and your daughter-in-law, Marissa, is the mastermind." His words were like a direct blow to the chest. I squeezed the glass on the table. My knuckles turned white. Rage and pain flooded me like a wave ready to sweep me away. Marissa, whom I had loved, whom I had trusted, the woman I thought would be the future of Alvarez Lumber. How could she do this to me? For money? For power? Or for a resentment I never knew existed? I looked at Michael, trying to keep my gaze steady, though tears threatened to fall. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice trembling but full of determination. Michael looked at me with a serious expression, but also with compassion. "We need more proof," he said. "I'll keep watching Chen Hao. I want to know who else he's involved with. But you, Teresa, must continue acting as if you know nothing. One wrong move and everything could fall apart." I nodded. I pushed open the door of the mansion and entered, trying to behave as naturally as possible. That dinner was a play I was forced to perform. So I sat across from Robert and Marissa. I smiled when Robert talked about a new project at the company, and I nodded when Marissa asked me about the supposed meeting in San Juan del Rio. "Mom, how was your day? Did the meeting with the partners go well?" she asked in her usual sweet tone. I looked her in the eyes, searching for a sign, but I only saw a perfect smile that hid everything. "All good, honey," I replied softly, though my heart was pounding, wanting to break out of my chest. EMTT? Sitting next to me, ate in silence, and occasionally looked at me as if asking if I had already done something about his warning. The following days, I continued with the charade. I went to work by taxi, pretending to be busy, but every time I walked through the door of the house, I felt I was entering a trap. Marissa began to show impatience. One night, when it was just the two of us in the kitchen drying dishes, she said with false concern, "Mom, why are you still taking taxis? Leaving the car in the garage for so long isn't good. If you want, I can take it to the mechanic tomorrow to have it checked." She smiled, but her gaze was cold, as if trying to read my thoughts. I set the glass down on the counter. The sound of the glass hitting the marble echoed coldly in the silent kitchen. I looked directly into her eyes, trying to maintain my calm, though inside I was boiling. "Why are you so worried about me not driving?" "Honey, is there something specific that makes you want me to use that car?" I asked, emphasizing every word, observing her reaction. Marissa's smile tightened just for a second, but I saw it. She looked uncomfortable, then forced a laugh and looked away. "No, Mom," she said, her tone sharper than usual. "I'm just worried about you. I've seen you tired, and I thought that was why." Then she hastily returned to the dishes, but I noticed her hand trembling slightly as she held the cloth. I didn't reply. I took a sip of water and let the silence speak for me. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Images and plans mixed in my head. EMTT's warning, we shifty eyes, Marissa's fake smile. They were all pieces of a terrifying puzzle I didn't want to accept as real. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, unable to bear the suffocating air in the room, I decided to go out to the garden for some fresh air. I walked barefoot, feeling the cold, damp grass under my feet, as if that coolness could help clear my mind. The moon was shining intensely, bathing the garden in a silver light that made everything seem magical yet unsettling. I moved slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady, though my heart felt heavy. As I passed the corner of the garden behind the pool, where there was an old set of stone table and chairs, I suddenly heard voices murmuring. My heart skipped a beat, pounding hard. I hid behind a large palm tree, pressing my body against the trunk and trying not to make a sound. From there, I saw two silhouettes sitting in the dark, talking in a low but clear voice. I immediately recognized Marissa and Wei. I slowly took out my phone, my fingers trembling as I activated the recorder and carefully raised it to record every word. Marissa's voice sounded tense, loaded with irritation and concern. "Are you sure she hasn't done anything to make her suspicious? She's been very strange lately. She insists on taking a taxi." "Did you let anything slip, Wei?" Wei responded in a reassuring tone, though the tension was noticeable. "Impossible, Mrs. Marissa. I've been very careful." Chen Hao already placed the device under the driver's seat. As soon as she starts the car, everything will be done. Maybe she's just genuinely tired. Marissa sighed, her voice lowering as if containing rage. "No, this method is too obvious, too risky. If that device stays there too long and the gardener or someone else finds it, the plan is ruined. Call Chen Hao tomorrow and tell him to remove it immediately." We hesitated. "Remove it?" "But no buts," Marissa interrupted, her voice cold as ice. "I'll come up with another way, something more natural. An accident, for example. For now, we need to erase all traces." I stood paralyzed behind the tree, trembling from head to toe. Every word from Marissa was like a direct stab to the heart. The recording on my phone was irrefutable proof. but also the blade that was slicing the last bit of trust I had in her. I carefully saved the file and sent a copy to my backup email. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. I retreated slowly, step by step, returning to the house through the back door, my heart heavy, as if carrying the life of my whole family in my hands. The next morning, when the sun was barely rising, I was in the living room with the phone in my hand, trying to keep my voice steady as I spoke to Robert and Marissa. "Today I have to go inspect a piece of land in the hill country," I said. "I probably won't be back until tonight. It's an ideal area for planting production forests." I heard Marissa's usual sweet voice reply, "Yes, Mom, take good care of yourself." I took a deep breath, feeling I was preparing to enter a silent battle. I didn't go to the hill country. Instead, I called a trusted taxi and headed directly to the state police headquarters where Michael had organized a secret meeting with Colonel Vance, the head of the Criminal Investigations Department. Sitting in the taxi, I looked out the window. The familiar streets of San Antonio passed by, but everything seemed blurred in my mind. At the police headquarters, they took me to a private meeting room, windowless with only an old wooden table and a few chairs. Colonel Vance, a tall man with a severe face, sat across from me. Michael was by his side, his gaze full of calm. I began to recount everything. My voice trembled, but I tried to keep it steady. First, I showed the photos Joseph had taken under the car, the red and blue wires, and a menacing black box. Then, I told them about Michael's investigative report, which included the video of the exchange between Wei and Chen-Ha at the night market. Finally, I placed the phone on the table. My fingers shook as I played the recording of the conversation between Marissa and Wei in the garden the night before. When Marissa's voice sounded cold and calculating, I watched Colonel Vance's face change. His serious expression turned to evident tension, his brow furrowed. "Are you sure she hasn't done anything to make her suspicious?" Marissa's voice echoed in the silent room. "Call Chen-Hao tomorrow to remove it immediately." When the recording reached that part, Colonel Vance motioned for me to stop it. He looked at me with a grave and decisive expression. "Mrs. Alvarez," he said in a deep voice, "we have enough evidence to act. We are going to set a trap. Go back home and behave as if you are still doing your inspections. Let everything run its course." They took me to a secure waiting room inside the headquarters, a small room with surveillance screens and a radio connected to the police team. Michael stayed with me. His presence was the only thing keeping me calm. Sitting in that cold room, I looked at the screen, my heart pounding hard. I knew that what was about to happen would change everything. My family, my company, and my entire life. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, through the cameras, I saw an old unmarked pickup truck parked on the street behind the mansion. A team of plainclothes police officers was hidden in nearby cars, waiting for the right moment. I held my breath, not taking my eyes off the monitor. Wei appeared, approached to talk with Joseph, and pointed toward the pool pump. He handed him a piece of paper and some cash, telling him the pump had a damaged part that could only be bought downtown. Joseph, as always, unsuspecting, got on his motorcycle and left immediately. As soon as Joseph disappeared, we opened the back gate. A man with a cap pulled down to cover his face stealthily entered and went straight to the garage. I recognized him immediately. It was Chen-Hao with the same nervous demeanor as in Michael's video. Colonel Vance, who was following the operation by radio, said quietly, "All teams in position. Wait for him to start acting." On the screen, I saw Chen-Hao open the garage door, pull a small set of tools from his pocket, and crouch under my Cadillac. I felt my heart stop. Every second felt eternal. Then, just at that moment, Colonel Vance's voice resonated over the transmitter. Now, 2 unmarked police cars sped in, blocking both ends of the alley. Officers wearing bulletproof vests emerged from their hiding spots, shouting, "Police! Freeze!" Chen-Hao jumped, tried to flee, but 2 officers wrestled him to the ground in an instant. Wei at the back gate was also subdued without being able to offer resistance. A specialized bomb disposal team entered the garage. I squeezed Michael's hand tightly, breathing raggedly. Minutes later, the voice of a team member sounded over the radio. The device has been deactivated. It is a homemade bomb with enough power to completely destroy the car and cause damage in a radius of 16 feet, 5 meters. Hearing that, I felt my legs weaken. If it hadn't been for EMTT's warning, if I had gotten into the car that morning, I dare not imagine. At the same time, another group of police officers, led by Colonel Vance, arrived at the Alvarez lumber offices. On the surveillance screen, I saw them head directly to the conference room where Marissa was presiding over a meeting with department heads. Robert was also there, sitting at the end of the table, attentively taking notes. When the police entered, Marissa frowned, her voice annoyed. "Excuse me, we're in a meeting. What do you need?" Colonel Vance showed the arrest warrant in front of her, his voice cold. "Marissa Reed is under arrest on suspicion of attempted homicide." The entire room fell silent. Robert jumped up, stammering, There must be some mistake. What are you talking about?" Marissa turned pale but tried to stay calm. "This is slander. What evidence do you have?" Colonel Vance didn't answer. He just signaled an officer to turn on a small recorder. Marissa and Way's voices from the garden the night before echoed through the room, clear and crisp. "Call Chenha tomorrow to remove it. I'll find another way, a more natural one." Marissa's confident smile instantly vanished. She stumbled backward and fell into the chair, covering her face with trembling hands. Robert and I were taken to the police station. We didn't enter the interrogation room. We were seated in a special observation room from where we could see through a one-way mirror. The first to be interrogated was Chen Hoa. He entered looking nervous, his handcuffed hands shaking behind his back. When Colonel Vance informed him of the charges he was facing, conspiracy to commit murder and illegal possession of explosives, his face turned white. In less than 10 minutes, he lowered his head and in a trembling voice confessed everything. He admitted to having crossed the border illegally years ago, living in hiding and sunk in gambling debts. Wei contacted him through an illegal casino at the El Mardo night market, offering him a large sum of dollars to pay off his debts and start a new life. "I only did what he asked," Chenha mumbled, not daring to look up. He gave me the house layout, Mrs. Alvarez's schedule, and said the best time was in the early morning, when everyone was asleep. He confessed that he didn't know how to make bombs, but knew someone in the arms trafficking trade across the border. He bought the explosive from that contact, following Wei's detailed instructions. Hearing him, a chill ran down my spine. Every detail, every step of the calculated plan chilled my blood. I looked at Robert. His hands were clenched at the edge of the chair, his knuckles white. I wanted to say something, but my throat wouldn't respond. Then it was Wei's turn. He entered with his head down, but still with a defiant expression. At first, he denied everything, his voice cold. "I don't know anything about this alleged bomb. This is a lie." But when Colonel Vance placed Chenha's signed statement and the night market video in front of him, his composure crumbled. He fell silent, his eyes moving from side to side, and finally lowered his head, beginning to confess. We admitted that his motive stemmed from an incident many years ago. He had stolen a small piece of my jewelry, a necklace Ernest had given me for our 20th wedding anniversary to sell and pay off his gambling debts. When I discovered it, instead of calling the police, I asked him to publicly apologize in front of all the household staff. I thought that was the way to teach him about honesty. I had told Ernest, but for Wei, it was a humiliation he could never erase. He held a grudge ever since, and when Marissa approached him with her plan, he accepted immediately, both for revenge and for the large sum of dollars she promised him. Hearing those words, I felt my heart clench. I never imagined that an act I considered compassionate would sow the seed of such a terrible conspiracy. I looked at Robert, wanting to take his hand, but his gaze remained fixed on the glass as if trying to understand why things had gone so far. Finally, Marissa was brought into the interrogation room. Unlike Chen Hao and Wei, she entered with a serene attitude, head held high, even with her personal lawyer by her side. She wore an elegant black suit, her hair pulled back as if preparing for an important meeting at Alvarez Lumber. not facing an attempted homicide charge. When Colonel Vance asked her about her involvement, Marissa smiled coldly and replied in an icy voice, "I don't know what you're talking about. That recording is false, a fabrication. Wei and Chen Hao conspired to frame and extort me. I am the victim here." I looked at Robert and saw him cover his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. "Mom," he whispered, his voice broken. "Is all of that true?" I didn't answer. I just put my hand on his shoulder, trying to transmit some strength to him, though I myself was faltering. Through the glass, I saw that Marissa still maintained her confident demeanor, but her hands resting on the table were clenched tightly as if trying to contain something inside her. Colonel Vance entered the interrogation room and placed a red-covered notebook on the table. "We have searched your personal safe at the office, Mrs. Reed," he said in a calm but cutting voice. "Is this notebook yours?" Marissa's face broke, the confident smile instantly disappearing. She tried to speak but couldn't utter a word. The colonel flipped through the pages, reading aloud the carefully written lines. Restructuring Project Phase 1. Eliminate the TA obstacle. Teresa Alvarez. Option A, car accident, high risk. Option B, poisoning, difficult to control. Option C, explosion, effective, definitive. He stopped and looked directly at her. Phase 2, psychologically manipulate C. Robert, exploit his grief to gain total control of the company. Share transfer. Phase 3, launch of the luxury furniture brand. Marissa Designs, using all Alvarez lumber resources. Every word he spoke fell on me like a blow. Marissa, the daughter-in-law I had loved so much, had planned not only to take my life, but also to manipulate my son to steal the legacy Ernest and I built with so much effort. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I pressed my lips together so as not to break down. Marissa collapsed. She rested her head on the table, her shoulders shaking and tears falling uncontrollably. Her lawyer tried to intervene, but she raised her hand to stop him. "Enough," she murmured, her voice broken. I admit everything." She lifted her head and looked directly at Colonel Vance, tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted something that was mine. I worked tirelessly for the company, but everything always revolved around Mrs. Teresa. I wanted to create something of my own." Next to me, Robert let out a choked sob. He stood up, staggering as if he wanted to leave the room. But I took his hand firmly. "Robert," I said in a hoarse voice, "Mom is here. I won't leave you alone." But I knew no words could alleviate his pain. His entire world had just shattered, and I, even as his mother, couldn't fix it. The trial took place a few months later on a gray day in San Antonio. I sat in the front row of the courtroom next to Robert, in the place designated for victims and family members. EMTT had been sent to a friend's house in the suburbs where he could play and for a time at least forget what was happening. I didn't want him to witness this, nor have those innocent eyes face the painful truth about his mother. The courtroom was packed, reporters crowded in the back, cameras and microphones ready to capture every moment. The case of a successful young businesswoman accused of trying to murder her mother-in-law to get the inheritance had shocked the entire state. Murmurs filled the air, but for me, everything sounded distant, like a faraway hum. I only focused on Robert sitting next to me, his hands clasped on his lap and his gaze vacant. He hadn't said a single word since we walked in, but I knew a silent storm was raging inside him. Marissa was led into the room, dressed in the orange prison uniform, thinner and paler than the last time I saw her. She kept her head down, not daring to look at us. Behind her were Wei and Chen Hao, also with their heads bowed, with the expression of those who know there is no way out. I watched them. These people, who were once part of my life and felt a painful emptiness in my chest. How had everything come to this point? Marissa's lawyer stood up, trying to argue that she acted under psychological pressure, that we had manipulated and persuaded her. But the prosecutor, with a firm voice and irrefutable evidence, dismantled every argument. They presented the recording of that conversation in the garden. Marissa's cold voice ordering the explosive device to be removed. The video of Chen Hao receiving a bag of dollars from Wei at the night market. The detailed statements of both men. Every word like a direct stab. And the final blow, Marissa's red leather notebook. Each page was projected onto a large screen, revealing a calculated plan down to the millisecond. Eliminate obstacle. T.A. Teresa Alvarez. Psychologically manipulate C. Robert. Launch Marissa Designs. Each line was another wound, and I had to bite my lips to hold back a sob. In her final statement, Marissa was allowed to speak. She stood up, her hands trembling, and for the first time looked directly at Robert and me. I'm sorry, she sobbed, tears running down her pale face. Greed and jealousy blinded me. I always felt I was living in my mother-in-law's shadow, having to follow her rules. I was wrong. Her voice cracked, but I felt no pity. Her apology couldn't undo what she had done. It couldn't mend the broken hearts of Robert, Emmett, or mine. Robert next to me clenched his fists, his whole body tense. I saw a tear slide down his cheek, not for forgiveness, but for the destruction of a man, of a father. I placed my hand on his shoulder, wanting to say something, but my throat closed up. How could I comfort him when I was drowning in the same pain? The court delivered the sentence. Marissa was sentenced to 25 years in prison for being the mastermind of the attempted murder. We, with the aggravating factor of having betrayed trust and acted out of revenge, received a sentence of 30 years. Chen Hao, thanks to his cooperation during the investigation, received a lighter sentence and would later be deported to China to face justice in his country. As the police escorted Marissa, she passed in front of us. She stopped for a second, looked at Robert, and whispered, "Take care of EMTT, please." Robert looked away without answering, his eyes as cold as ice. The next day, I was in my office trying to concentrate on work when Robert walked in. He placed an already signed divorce petition and a letter of resignation on the desk. "Mom," he said, his voice, "I can't stay here. Every corner of this house, of this company, reminds me of her. I need to leave." He told me he was taking Emmett to the small house in the suburbs of Austin, where our family had lived in the early years of struggle. It was a place full of pure memories of his childhood, a place not tainted by Marissa's betrayal. I looked into his eyes and saw deep pain and immense exhaustion. I knew Robert needed time to heal, to find himself again. "Go," I said, my voice choked. "When you feel strong enough, come back. Your mother and the company will always be here waiting for you." I stood up and hugged him tightly, feeling his body tremble in my arms. When he left, I remained still in the office, looking out the window where the sunlight fell on the neatly stacked lumber in the yard. In the following days, the mansion became empty and cold. EMTT's laughter was no longer heard, nor were there family scenes. I could only hear from my son and grandson through brief video calls. EMTT would tell me about his days running through the fields, about the butterflies he caught, but in his eyes, I still saw a sadness he couldn't express in words. Robert, in the few times we spoke, only nodded and smiled weakly, as if trying to keep me from worrying. A year passed in the blink of an eye, though for me, each day was a long journey full of challenges. I dedicated that time to holding Alvarez Lumber together, managing the media crisis after the scandal, and maintaining the team's morale. The work was so intense that I barely had time to give into sadness or painful memories. But every night, returning to the empty mansion, I felt an emptiness impossible to fill. EMTT's laughter was gone. The family scenes were gone. And the presence of Robert, the son I thought would always be by my side, was gone. I learned to live with the pain, though that didn't mean getting used to it. Every time I looked at the dining table, I still saw Marissa's face, her fake smile, and my heart ached again. But I repeated to myself that I had to be strong, not just for me, but for Robert and EMTT, the people I loved the most. I fought to protect them, and now I had to continue to prevent our family from completely falling apart. One Friday afternoon, while reviewing the quarterly report in my office, the secretary gently knocked on the door. "Ma'am, someone wants to see you." I looked up a little surprised as I had no appointments scheduled. The door opened and Robert walked in. I was speechless. He looked different, his skin tanned, his body firmer, and most importantly, his eyes no longer held that empty sadness from before. Next to him was Emmett, a little taller, with a radiant smile and eyes full of joy. "Grandma!" Emmett shouted, running toward me to hug me. Robert was there, smiling, a genuine smile, the first I had seen in over a year. He walked closer and said warmly, "Mom, I'm ready." Those 3 simple but powerful words were like a gust of wind that dissipated all the weight I was carrying on my chest. I stood up, hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of his body as if I were embracing the whole world I had once lost again. EMT. T also ran to us, his little arms circling both of us, forming a warm family hug. At that moment, I felt tears rolling down my face, but this time they were tears of relief and happiness. Robert returned to work, but not in the executive office as before. He chose to work in the workshop, where he could give free rein to his passion for wood carving. I watched him, his hands covered in sawdust, carefully sculpting every detail on the pieces of wood, and saw in him the same passionate look Ernest once had. Robert designed a new line of furniture that combined modern technique with the simplicity and elegance of artisanal art. When the collection hit the market, it exceeded all expectations, breathing new life into Alvarez lumber. Customers were delighted, partners congratulated him, and I knew Robert hadn't just returned, he was rediscovering himself. Months later, at a board meeting, I stood up in front of everyone, my voice trembling but firm. "I have dedicated my entire life to building Alvarez lumber," I said, looking around the room where familiar faces listened attentively. "But now is the time to hand it over to the next generation." I announced my retirement and ceded the position of Chief Executive Officer to Robert. When he stood up to present his vision for the company's future, I saw Ernest's reflection in his eyes. Passion, determination, and sincerity. I knew then that I could be at peace. My life entered a new phase. I decided to sell the large mansion that held so many memories, both happy and painful. I moved to a smaller house in the suburbs with a garden full of petunias and fruit trees. I adopted a golden retriever dog and named him Ernest in honor of my husband, who was always my greatest inspiration. Every morning, I took him for a walk, breathing the fresh air and listening to the birds sing as if life itself were reminding me that beautiful things still remained. Joseph, after retiring, often came to help me with the garden. We became good friends, sharing afternoons under the shade of the trees, drinking tea and reminiscing about old times. He would tell stories of the early days working with my family when Ernest was still alive, and I would tell him about the dreams we once had. Those simple moments full of calm helped me heal little by little. Every weekend, Robert and EMTT came to visit me. We cooked together, tended the garden, or simply sat on the porch to watch the sunset. EMTT loved telling me about his school, his new friends in Austin, and I noticed his smile becoming increasingly bright. Robert, although still bearing scars on his soul, had learned to live again for his son and for himself. One afternoon, the golden light of the sun poured through the window of my small house. Sitting in my armchair, I stroked Ernest's soft fur as I watched Robert and EMTT laughing in the garden. The boy was trying to climb an apple tree, and Robert pretended to threaten to bring him down. Their laughter mixed with the wind, creating a melody of life. I closed my eyes, feeling that peace had finally returned. I have faced betrayal, death, and the loss of a part of my family, but I didn't give up. I fought not just to survive, but to keep what was most valuable: Robert's love, Emmett's smile, and the legacy Ernest left behind. Sitting there in the glow of the sunset, I understood that the truly important thing was not a successful company or material achievements, but those moments of calm when my family was still together after overcoming the biggest storm of our lives. After everything I lived through, I understood that the greatest tragedy of human beings is not betrayal, but trusting the wrong person. I used to believe that kindness and love could change everything. But sometimes it's that blind faith that makes us pay the highest price. I lost almost everything. Trust, happiness, and a part of my heart. But from those ruins, I learned to rise stronger and wiser. Life taught me that no matter how dark the night, truth and justice always end up shining through. And most importantly, sincere love between mother and son, between grandmother and grandson, is the only light that never goes out, even when everything else collapses. The story you have just heard has had the names and places changed to protect the identity of those involved. We are not telling it to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and reflects. How many mothers might be suffering in silence within their own homes? I sincerely ask myself, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to keep silent to maintain the peace? Or would you have the courage to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a light that guides others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. Now on the final screen, I'll leave 2 of the channel's most loved stories. I'm sure they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.